a great sign appeared in the sky, a woman clothed with the sun, with the moon beneath her feet, and on her head a crown of 12 stars. She was with child, and wailed aloud in pain as she labored to give birth. Then another sign appeared in the sky. It was a huge red dragon, with seven heads and 10 horns, and on its head were 7 diadems. Its tail swept away a third of the stars in the sky, and hurled them down to the earth. Then the dragon stood before the woman about to give birth, to devour her child when she gave birth. She gave birth to a son, a male child, destined to rule all the nations with an iron rod. Her child was caught up to God and his throne. The woman herself fled into the desert, where she had a place prepared by God. Then I heard a loud voice in heaven say, "Now hath salvation and power come, and the kingdom of our God, and the authority of his anointed one." The word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God.
A reading from the first letter of St. Paul to the Corinthians. Brothers and sisters, Christ has been raised from the dead, the first fruits of those who have fallen asleep. For since death came through man, the resurrection of the dead came also through him. For just as in Adam all died, so too in Christ shall all be brought to life, but each one in proper order. Christ the first fruits, then at his coming, those who belong to Christ. Then comes the end, when he hands over the kingdom to his God and Father, when he has destroyed every sovereignty and every authority and power. For he must reign until he has put all enemies under his feet. The last enemy to be destroyed is death, for he subjected everything under his feet. The word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God.
where she entered the house of Zachariah and was greeted by Elizabeth. When Elizabeth heard Mary's greeting, the infant leapt in her womb, and Elizabeth, filled with the Holy Spirit, cried out in a loud voice and said, "Blessed are you among women, and blessed is the fruit of your womb. And how does this happen to me, that the mother of my Lord should come to me? For at the moment the sound of your greeting reached my ears, the infant in my womb leapt for joy. Blessed are you who believe, for what was spoken to you by the Lord would be fulfilled." And Mary said, "My soul proclaims the greatness of the Lord. My spirit rejoices in God my Savior, for he has looked upon his lowly servant. From this day all generations will be called blessed, and Almighty has done great things for me, and holy is his name. He has mercy on those who fear him in every generation. He has shown the strength of his arms and scattered the proud from their conceit. He has cast down the mighty from their thrones and has filled up the lowly. He has filled the hungry with great things, and the rich he has sent away empty. He has come to help his servant Israel, for he has remembered his promise of mercy, the promise he made to our fathers, to Abraham and his children forever." Mary remained with her about 3 months, and then returned home. The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ.
The dogma of the Assumption of the Blessed Virgin Mary was infallibly defined by Pope Pius XII in 1950. Before the formal promulgation of the doctrine, Pius sponsored a worldwide survey of the Catholic people, consulting the faithful to see whether they would sanction this teaching, and the response was overwhelmingly positive. The roots of this dogma in the tradition of the Church are old indeed. The Holy Father was certain a doctrinal definition would give voice to something the Catholic people since ancient times had never ceased believing. The Feast of the Assumption had been celebrated since the 4th century and has been handed down to each generation ever since. So what precisely does the dogma of the Assumption teach? That Mary was raised in heavenly glory in body and soul at the end of her earthly life. Therefore, Mary did not have to wait for the final resurrection of the body, and her remains were spared corruption. The Church realizes this assertion can strike the contemporary mind as bizarre, mythological, naive, and even pre-scientific. Greek philosophy tends to construe salvation as an escape from the soul from the prison of the body. One of the best-known dialogues of Plato on the soul, Socrates urged his friends not to mourn over his coming death, but to see it as a much longed-for liberation from the body. This philosophy is alien to biblical teaching, which does not envision salvation as a separation of the soul from the body, but rather a transfiguration of the entire self. In Scripture, both in the book of Revelation and in the second letter of Peter, record not an escape of the soul from the body, but rather entering into a new heavens and a new earth. The Assumption describes the full salvation of the prime disciple of Jesus, Mary. Mary's entry in the fullness of her person, body and soul, into the presence of God. At the end of the creed, we speak of our hope of the resurrection of the body. Mary, assumed body and soul into heaven, has experienced precisely this kind of resurrection and has become the sign of hope for the rest of the human race to follow. If we are to respond adequately to the skeptics, a second observation must be made. When we speak of the Assumption, we are not envisioning a journey Mary made through space, as if Mary flew through the sky. The heavens, quote-unquote, are a rich and consistent biblical symbol for the transcendent, for a matter of existence that lies beyond our familiar dimensions of space and time. The Assumption of Mary means the Blessed Mother was elevated in the totality of her being from the dimension of the earth to the higher dimension of heaven. So a comparison will help you. Think of a square, a circle, and a triangle plotted in a two-dimensional plane. And now, imagine these figures elevated to a third dimension, and we have a cube, a sphere, and a pyramid. They haven't lost their former identities, but they've been heightened, deepened, and perfected. It's the same with our Blessed Mother. Mary, who existed in the higher dimension of heaven, intercedes, helps, and prays for us. The skeptical unbelievers will only know this world, and they'll see this as ridiculous. But for us believers, the doctrine of Mary's Assumption both whets our appetite for this higher world and fills our minds as we think about it. At this point, I'd like to offer a word of reflection on something that is related to the dogma of the Assumption, but is not formally contained within. And that is the teaching concerning the Dormition, or the falling asleep of Mary. Did Mary, at the end of her days, die in the ordinary sense, or fall asleep in the Lord? The Church does not officially tell us. There are some Orthodox Catholic theologians, including Bishop Barrett, who is a 21st century Fulton Sheen in my estimation, well-known author, auxiliary bishop of the Archdiocese of Los Angeles, who explains the end of Mary's days as Mary did not so much die in the ordinary sense, but fell asleep in the Lord. So it sounds strange, but it conveys something of great spiritual importance. Death can be taken in a purely biological or physiological sense to mean the cessation of bodily activity, heartbeat, breathing, brain waves, and so on. Or it can be construed in a wider psychological and spiritual sense to mean the full range of feelings, reactions, and fears that accompany biological death. At the prospect of death, most of us back off in terror, either at the mystery of it all, the unknown is what frightens us the most, or because of the judgment that awaits us. I talked about this in last Sunday's homily. Most of us don't even want to think about it. But in either case, our fright is prompted by sin, a lack of confident trust in the love of God. So what would it be like for a sinless person to enter into death? What would it be, would not he or she face it with an utter calmness of spirit, the way most of us fall asleep at night, convinced we're going to wake up in the morning. In this sense, the Blessed Mother did not die, but she fell asleep, confidently expecting to wake up in heaven, which is not an altogether unreasonable way to speak of the end of Mary's earthly life. Other theologians, including St. John Paul II, teach that Mary did die, a natural death, asserting the Assumption is essentially an event of grace, including, as it was the case for her Son, both the death and the resurrection. After the resurrection of Christ, the assumed Mary is the sign of the dignity of persons, of their future destiny to glory. Both the resurrection and the Assumption teach us that the destiny of humankind, made in the image and likeness of Almighty God, is not an undoing of personhood or a cessation into nothingness, but rather, to quote St. Paul, but an arriving to the full stature of Christ. Mary and her glorification is the sign of the completion of the human vocation, the only one who fulfills this vocation, to be enveloped in the glory of the living God, to resonate the hymn of pure praise, and to respond in pure love.